It's crazy to think that nearly 3 decades have passed since the release of the original PlayStation. I don't know about you, but that makes me feel old. There have been some major advances since we last took a look at the console's evolution, so I figured it's time we followed suit with an all-in-one update.
Or a burden too heavy to bear.
Remember this. You are not alone.
So, let's see how PlayStation evolved over the years and revolutionized the gaming industry. This is the evolution of PlayStation. As huge as Sony's PlayStation is nowadays, it may not have existed at all if it weren't for the decision of another gaming giant, Nintendo. That's because originally Sony were reluctant to build their own gaming machine and instead worked with other companies, like Nintendo, to create add-ons for existing products. For example, in 1988, Sony helped to build a CD-ROM version of Nintendo's hugely popular SNES. The resulting console was unveiled in 1991 and was called the PlayStation. However, just one day after its announcement, Nintendo broke its partnership deal with Sony and opted to team up with Philips instead. Sony's president, Norio Oga, was furious in response to this rejection and tasked Ken Kutaragi with developing the PlayStation into a machine that would compete with Nintendo's. In December 1994, the new PlayStation was born. Released in Japan to begin with, the console was a roaring success and would be distributed to a worldwide audience 1 year later. It cost $299 at launch and went on to become the first game console in history to sell more than 100 million units. The PlayStation's main advantage over the competition was that it used CD for all of its games, as opposed to the heavy use of cartridges at the time. Whereas a cartridge could store maybe 12 to 15 megabytes of data, developers using CD could store up to 650 megabytes. A memory card containing 128 kilobytes of storage was required to save your game progress. The PlayStation's superior specifications meant better graphics and an overall improved gameplay experience. As a result, established franchises like Final Fantasy actually switched from Nintendo to PlayStation. Classic games like Ridge Racer, Crash Bandicoot, and Metal Gear Solid also attracted a wide audience and showcased the amazing performance of the console. As for PlayStation's best-selling game, that would be Gran Turismo, of course. Gran Turismo was incredibly difficult to develop. Game designer Kazunori Yamachi said, quote, "It took 5 years. In those 5 years, we could not see the end. I would wake up at work, go to sleep at work. It was getting cold, so I knew it must be winter. I estimate I was home only 4 days a year." All the hard work resulted in groundbreaking graphics, and it is considered one of the greatest video games of all time. It was also a huge financial success, with over 10.9 million copies sold. Gran Turismo has become a huge series since its debut in 1997. The latest game in the series is Gran Turismo 7, which was released on March 4th, 2022. It's mind-blowing to see how much graphics have evolved in 25 years. Sony's machine was pretty impressive as a music CD player too. It played discs with great clarity, and as such, it served multiple uses, appealing to both families and older generations. This tradition of dual purpose would be seen in later versions of PlayStation, with the PS2 catering to DVDs and the PS3 serving as one of the cheapest Blu-ray players upon its release. Sony spent a long time making sure the PlayStation controller was comfortable and reflected the 3D aspect of its games, too. The increased thickness of the controller in comparison to other consoles of the era, and even the PlayStation's 3D logo design, were in reference to this. Clearly inspired by the controller used on Nintendo's NES system, the PlayStation controller added shoulder buttons to allow gamers more in-play options, plus handles for better grip. Rather than assigning letters to each button, the iconic square, triangle, circle, and cross symbols were introduced. What's more, these symbols actually mean something too. The triangle refers to a viewpoint. and the direction a player is headed. The square button indicates a piece of paper, acting as the game's menu, and the circle and X buttons mean yes and no, respectively, even though they are rarely used for their intended purposes in games nowadays. The shapes are still seen on modern controllers and are closely linked to PlayStation's brand image. Sony's attention to detail has always been impressive. To ensure their PlayStation controller wasn't too heavy, it was tested by gamers in all sorts of positions, including lying down. When it was released in North America, the controllers were made 10% larger than the ones used in Japan, because most Americans' hands were bigger than those of the Japanese. To give players a better range of motion in 3D environments, Sony created the dual analog controller in 1996, adding 2 analog sticks, which were revolutionary at the time. With the release of the new controller came 2 analog-capable titles, Tobal 2 and Bushido Blade. 1 year later, Sony introduced the DualShock controller, which featured rumble support. That meant that the dual analog controller could now vibrate, adding an extra dimension and increased immersiveness for gamers. The analog sticks were also given textured grips, longer handles, and improved shoulder buttons. Plus, you could press in the analog sticks to act as additional commands. PlayStation games that managed to take full advantage of these new features included Spyro the Dragon, Final Fantasy VIII, and Crash Bandicoot 3. Due to the success of the DualShock controller, it soon became the default controller for the PlayStation. In 2000, a smaller, rounder version of the PlayStation was released and was referred to as the PS1. In addition to its new, sleek design, it featured an updated graphical user interface, designed to make menu navigation easier. Despite the imminent arrival of the PlayStation 2 that same year, sales of the PS1, which cost only $99 at launch, were surprisingly high. Of the 102.49 million PlayStation units sold, 28.2 million were PS1s, featuring the newer design. Fun fact, father of the PlayStation hated Crash Bandicoot to begin with. He felt that the character was too immature, and that PlayStation should target a more mature audience. The former CEO of Sony soon came around, though, when he realized that everyone, including mature gamers, seemed to love Crash. The beloved Bandicoot served as PlayStation's official mascot up to the year 2000. Now, unless you're from Japan or you're a huge PlayStation enthusiast, chances are that you've probably never even heard of the PocketStation. It was released exclusively in Japan in January 1999 as a peripheral to the original PlayStation home console. In addition to working as a memory card, it featured a monochrome LCD screen and worked as a standalone miniature handheld gaming device. It also had a real-time clock, built-in flash memory, infrared communication capability, and sound. The PocketStation measured just 64 by 42 millimeters in height and width. It had a wide variety of games, with its best-selling title being Dakademo Iso, which sold over 1.5 million copies. Despite the handheld's relative obscurity outside of Japan, it proved insanely popular and sold over 5 million units there. The PocketStation was discontinued in 2002, but was later revived in 2013 as an application for the PlayStation Vita, available through the Japanese PlayStation Store. The app allows users to play classic PlayStation games in a PocketStation minigame format, which is pretty cool. To create these evolution videos, we do a lot of research by visiting all kinds of websites, but we never know if a site is safe or not. That's why I use NordVPN to keep me safe online. Nowadays, everything is online, so I think it's essential to keep our data and IP address safe. But that's not all. What I really love about NordVPN is that I can change my location instantly and watch series and movies on Netflix that I normally wouldn't be able to see. I can now watch all of the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter movies, thanks to the magical powers of NordVPN. I feel like I'm a real wizard now.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. If you go to nordvpn.com/flatlife, you'll get a huge discount off the 2-year plan with 4 additional months for free. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so why not just try it out and keep your data safe while feeling like a wizard? Go to nordvpn.com/flatlife or click the link in the description. Riding on the back of the PlayStation's colossal success, the PlayStation 2, or PS2 for short, was released in the year 2000. It cost $299 at launch, which was the same launch price as the original PlayStation. While Sony's initial console was revolutionary, its successor was outstanding and solidified Sony's position as a permanent rival to Nintendo and later Microsoft in the years to come. The PS2 made a seamless transition from using CDs to DVDs, meaning it could be used to watch movies as well as play games, and allowed for online play with high-definition 3D visuals. Meanwhile, the PS2 memory card upped its capacity to 8 megabytes of storage. Much-loved franchises like Ratchet & Clank, God of War,
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece.
and Jak and Daxter found their feet with the PS2, while already popular series such as Grand Theft Auto saw a massive boost with the console's heightened power. For example, GTA 3 offered gamers a fully immersive sandbox-style game in 3 dimensions for the first time. Multiple accessories were released for the PS2 with varying success. They included the iToy camera, SingStar microphones, and buzzers, all of which increased the levels of interaction players experienced, for a short while anyway. The controller was also updated with the introduction of the DualShock 2. Though it looked similar to the original, it weighed significantly less. The analog sticks were more robust, and the standard versions were black instead of gray to fit in with the PS2's darker color scheme. That the controller looked so similar to its predecessor was exceptional at the time. New consoles were expected to launch with entirely re-imaged controllers. If we look at Nintendo, we can see that the SNES had an entirely different controller compared to the Nintendo 64. And yet again, the GameCube came with a redesigned controller. The most notable upgrade, however, were the pressure-sensitive buttons, which could be used in racing games such as Gran Turismo to control the car's speed with more precision. This clever mechanic worked well for the PlayStation 2's best-selling game, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The pressure sensitivity of the buttons could also be used for shooting and aiming mechanics, as seen in Metal Gear Solid 2, when a light button press resulted in the player holding up their gun without shooting. A slimmer, lighter PlayStation 2 console was released in 2014 with a starting price of $149. Known as the PS2 Slim, it was also quieter than the standard model and had a built-in Ethernet port. The design was trimmed further in future years, and this constant slimming of consoles would become tradition for later PlayStations in the series. Over the years, countless games were released, including Gran Turismo 4, Final Fantasy X, and Kingdom Hearts. While 2,500 games have been released for the PlayStation 3, 3,200 games for the PlayStation 4, and about 500 games so far for the PlayStation 5, for the PlayStation 2, a whopping 4,400 games have been released. That's insane, and what's even more impressive is that these games led to over 1.5 billion game copies being sold. With such a stellar video game library, novel accessories, and interesting concepts, it's no wonder that the PS2 remains the best-selling video console ever, having sold over 155 million units. Fun fact, shortly after the release of the PlayStation 2, an internet myth circulated online that suggested Saddam Hussein had purchased 4,000 PS2s for use as a supercomputer, which was allegedly to be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Despite both Sony and the US Customs Service claiming there was no evidence of any such shipment of PS2s to Iraq, the rumor persisted, and it wasn't completely unfounded. Experts suggested that the PS2 processors could be combined to form a mighty powerful computer capable of executing at least 1.2 trillion instructions per second, which would be enough juice to simulate nuclear detonations. visualize biological or chemical processes, or engage in advanced weapons design. One of Sony's PlayStation products exclusive to Japan was the PSX, which was released in 2003. It was actually a fully integrated DVR, a digital video recorder, combined with a PlayStation 2. It featured software for video, photo, and audio editing, while also supporting online game capability using an internal broadband adapter. This meant that games using the PS2 hard disk drive were also supported. Interestingly, the PSX was the first product released by Sony under the PlayStation brand that did not include a controller with the device itself. It was also the first to use the cross-media bar, which could transfer videos and music via USB to other systems like the PlayStation Portable. Speaking of which, Sony's first serious attempt at a handheld gaming console was the PlayStation Portable, or PSP for short. It was released in December 2004 in Japan and in 2005 everywhere else. The introductory price in the US was $249. The PSP was up against some tough opposition from the start though, as it was competing with Nintendo's very popular DS console. Nintendo had already firmly established themselves in the handheld market by this point, meaning Sony had some catching up to do. One feature that set the PSP apart was that it was the first to use the optical storage medium known as the Universal Media Disc. This meant that it could store both games and movies. The advanced graphics capabilities were also what made the PSP stand out. Players could connect to their PlayStation 2, PS3, any computer with a USB port, other PSP systems, and the internet. Of course, the biggest draw was the games. Launch titles included games like Need for Speed Underground Rivals, Metal Gear Acid, and Spider-Man 2. Later games included God of War, Ghost of Sparta, Grand Theft Auto, Vice City Stories, and Daxter. The best-selling PSP game was Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City Stories, which sold over 7.6 million copies. Just like the home consoles, the handheld PSP was also given a makeover and put on a diet. The PSP 2000, released in 2007, was 33% lighter and 19% thinner. The disc loading trays, speakers, and D-pad were all rearranged, and a lighter, more energy-efficient battery was installed. Other upgrades included USB charging, increased memory, a brighter LCD screen, and the ability to play PSP games and other media on a TV screen, thanks to a new video output feature. The introduction of the PSP 3000, also known as the PSP Slim and Light or the PSP Bright 1 year later, offered an even better LCD screen with twice the color gamut and 5 times the contrast ratio. An anti-reflective finish was added to reduce glare, and a microphone was installed so that people could video call using apps like Skype. By this time, Sony were beginning to see the downsides of using universal mini discs, or the UMDs, mainly that they were too expensive, and they were losing ground to Nintendo in the handheld market. So in 2009, they released the PSP Go, which did not require the purchase of UMDs and instead relied on downloads from the PlayStation Store. The design was streamlined to better fit into gamers' pockets. But a huge drawback was that the Go was not backwards compatible with the original PSP, meaning if you already owned a PSP but wanted to upgrade, you'd have to buy all of your favorite games again. Plus, the micro memory cards for the PSP Go were quite expensive, so even if gamers were paying a little bit less for the games themselves, they still ended up paying more overall if they needed extra space to store them on their device. As a result, the PSP Go was a complete failure when it hit the market. Sony's final noteworthy edition of the PSP came in 2011 when they released the E1000 model, also known as the PSP Street. Available only in the PAL region, it was basically just a budget, stripped-down version of the PSP. It had no Wi-Fi capability, no microphone, and a monaural speaker as opposed to stereo speakers. It was an okay option for casual gamers who didn't care about online play and didn't want to spend much on a handheld gaming device. In total, around 82 million PSPs were sold, making it the third best-selling handheld gaming device ever. But it was still outdone by the Nintendo DS family, which to date has sold more than 154 million handhelds. Going back to home consoles, 2006 saw the debut of Sony's PlayStation 3, and with it came the first real signs of trouble for the company. Having made yet another transition, this time from DVD to Blu-ray, it became difficult for Sony to turn a profit because of its reliance on new, cutting-edge technology. They were already competing with the Nintendo Wii and Microsoft's Xbox 360 at this point, but lost out on many initial sales, mainly due to the PS3's high price point at launch, which was a whopping $499 for a 20GB model and $599 for a 60GB console. Thankfully, Sony was able to weather the storm, and 87.4 million PS3s ended up being sold, which was over 3 million more units than the Xbox 360. The PS3's upgrades over previous models included Wi-Fi connectivity, the use of PlayStation Network, and an online PlayStation Store. Gamers no longer had to use a memory card either, as game data could be stored on the system's internal hard drive. Many groundbreaking and hugely technical games were released for the PlayStation 3, including The Last of Us, Gran Turismo 5, Metal Gear Solid 4, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. The PS3 also introduced a new major franchise with Uncharted, Drake's Fortune. The first game in the series was released in November 2007. Due to the critical and commercial success of Drake's Fortune, Uncharted became a major franchise. Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, was released 2 years later in 2009 and was praised for its technical innovation, gameplay mechanics, storytelling, and graphics. In fact, it has been considered one of the best video games of all time and received over 300 awards, including numerous Game of the Year awards. On Metacritic, it received a score of 96, making it the most critically acclaimed game of 2009. The final game in the series for the PS3 was Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. All three games led to millions of sales and were published exclusively for the PlayStation 3. These action-adventure games were incredibly important to the success of the PlayStation 3. Another game that was extremely important for the success of the PlayStation 3, but wasn't a PlayStation exclusive, was, of course, Grand Theft Auto 5. It is considered one of the best video games ever made, and broke industry records by earning $800 million in its first day. GTA 5 became the best-selling title for the PlayStation 3 with 29.5 million copies sold. Wow, this is even more than all three Uncharted games' sales combined. Ken Kutaragi, the father of the PlayStation, wanted a completely different controller for the PlayStation 3, but the initial boomerang design was not well received. After receiving some very negative feedback, Sony knew that such a drastic change would annoy players and decided the risk wasn't worth taking. So they went back to the drawing board and looked at how they could improve the DualShock 2 controller while keeping the layout mostly similar. What they came up with was the 6-axis, a name that referred to its motion sensing technology with the ability to sense motion in all axes of the 6 degrees of freedom. Notably, the 6-axis was the first wireless PlayStation controller. Its shoulder triggers were redesigned, and the pressure sensitivity of the analog sticks was increased. It also didn't have the option to turn analog off and instead had a button that allowed access to the system menu. Though a pioneering feature, the motion control aspect of the 6-axis was mostly a gimmick and wasn't utilized well in games. The 6-axis controller was succeeded by the DualShock 3, which had a similar design and functions but added vibration feedback. Motion controls were an emerging trend during the PS3 era, and in 2010, Sony had another crack at it with the PlayStation Move. At the time, Nintendo had found huge success with their Wii console, which would end up outselling the PS3 by more than 14 million units. The PlayStation Move was Sony's answer to the Wii, and although it was generally well received by critics, the PlayStation 3 didn't have an expansive library of games containing motion controls to back it up, unlike the Wii, which was centered around them. The The bright neon ball on a controller that resembled an ice cream cone was divisive, being both ridiculed and admired at the same time. In total, 15 million PlayStation Move units were shifted, but the device did not live up to Sony's expectations. Keeping with tradition, Sony released a slim version of the PS3 in 2009. It was 33% smaller, 36% lighter, and consumed 34 to 45% less power than previous models. The PS3 Slim cost $299 upon release. It featured a new cooling system and was quieter than the standard model. Over 1 million units were sold within its first 3 weeks. The PS3 Super Slim came out in 2012, featuring a completely redesigned case with a sliding door to cover the disk drive, which itself had been relocated to the top of the console. The Super Slim was almost 3 pounds lighter than the Slim model and cost $269 at launch. Fun fact, the idea of grouping PlayStations together to form a supercomputer didn't let up when the PS3 released. In fact, it intensified and was made real when the US Air Force connected 1,760 PS3 consoles together to form one big supercomputer known as the Condor Cluster. In 2010, it was the 33rd largest supercomputer in existence and was used to analyze high-definition satellite imagery, or so they say. Sony's last roll of the dice, in terms of handheld gaming devices, came with the PlayStation Vita, which hit store shelves in 2011 on the Japanese market and in 2012 everywhere else. It had the same launch price as the original PSP, set at $249. By now, Sony had proven itself in the games industry, but was still being outperformed in the portable gaming market by Nintendo, whose latest release was the 3DS. Sony's new Vita model featured dual analog sticks, which gamers had been crying out for since the release of the PSP, and was capable of displaying impressive graphics on a 5-inch OLED multi-touch capacitive touchscreen. The device also featured a rear touchpad and 6-axis motion sensors, while supporting Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and optional 3G. A second-generation PS Vita 2000 series was released in 2013, more commonly known as the PS Vita Slim, because of its reduction in thickness and weight. It also had an extended battery life and used an LCD screen instead of an OLED screen. Games in the Vita's library included Assassin's Creed 3, Liberation, Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, Little Big Planet PS Vita, Killzone Mercenary, and Uncharted Golden Abyss. Unfortunately, many of the titles failed to live up to their hype. In order to be a success, the Vita had to recapture people's attention and do something innovative. It had some great features, but ultimately, it was just Sony's attempt to provide a PlayStation 3 in a portable package. By contrast, Nintendo changed the game with the 3DS, which is why 3DS sales stand at over 75 million, whereas the Vita sold just 15 million units. There were hopes that the Vita would be updated to work in tandem with the PlayStation 4, and the two consoles were even bundled together for a brief time in the UK. However, it ultimately didn't work out, and the Vita got left behind. Upon news that the Vita was going to be discontinued in 2019, Sony Entertainment's CEO Jim Ryan announced that Sony would be pulling out of the handheld gaming market. He said that although the Vita was brilliant in many ways, and the actual gaming experience was great, clearly it was a business that wasn't working out for them. Oddly enough, the PS Vita had already been converted into a home console as early as 2013. Released in Japan that year and in 2014 everywhere else, the PlayStation TV was essentially a home micro-console variant of the handheld PlayStation Vita. It did not have a display screen, but instead hooked up to a television via HDMI. Gamers could use a DualShock 3 controller to play games from the Vita's library, though for obvious reasons, some games that normally used the handheld functions like the touchscreen, rear touchpad, microphone, or camera could not be played on PlayStation TV. That still left over 100 Vita games that could be played though, as well as various digital PSP, PlayStation, and PC Engine titles. The system also supported remote play, streaming across multiple platforms, and access to the PlayStation Store. When it came time for the next true iteration of home game consoles in 2013, Sony had learned their lesson and gained high praise and support after announcing that the PS4 would be $100 cheaper than the new Xbox One. A 500GB PS4 cost $399 at launch. This undercutting strategy certainly paid off for Sony, as over 1 million PS4s were sold in just its first day, setting the record for the fastest-selling console in a 24-hour period. As of 2020, more than 113.5 million PS4s have been sold in total. Owners of the PS4 benefited from stunning graphics with vibrant visuals and innovative software that allowed for streaming and sharing gameplay instantly on social media. PlayStation also released their on-demand system called PlayStation Now in 2014, allowing subscribers to access hundreds of mainstream and indie games from the past and present. In 2018, God of War was released and has since been cited as among the greatest video games of all time. It received universal acclaim for its story, world design, graphics, and combat system. It has also become the most sold game on the PS4, with 19.5 million copies sold. Only a few months later, Marvel's Spider-Man was launched, allowing Spider-Man to swing through beautiful New York City.
Peter, it's time to get up.
And many more amazing games were released, including Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, The Last of Us 2, and Horizon Zero Dawn.
Questions, Aloy. The tribe has forbidden. What if the answers are worse than not knowing?
You can help, or you can get out of my way.
Then be ready for the darkness.
The rise of PlayStation VR in 2016 allowed gamers to get right into the thick of the action and experience some titles in a convincing virtual reality setting. With its 5.7-inch OLED display, the system operates at 120 Hz, eliminating blur and producing a smooth image, while 3D audio technology allows the player to hear from all angles. The PlayStation 4 Slim was also released in 2016, costing $299 for the 500GB model. The casing on the Slim model was 40% smaller, had rounded edges, and a matte finish on the top of the console rather than a two-tone finish. At the same time, the PS4 Pro launched with a $399 price tag. The 1TB model featured an upgraded GPU and was primarily designed to enable certain games to be played in 4K resolution with high dynamic range. Plus, it offered better quality and support for the PlayStation VR. In terms of controllers for the PS4, this time, Sony kept it simple by sticking with a familiar design. The DualShock 4 did include multiple new features though, such as a touchpad on the front of the controller, mono speakers, and a dedicated share button that allows players to upload screenshots and videos from their gameplay experiences. The top of the controller features a light bar, which changes color according to different gameplay situations. For instance, in Grand Theft Auto 5, the light bar flashes red and blue when a player is wanted by police. It was more comfortable than any of its predecessors and stayed true to the core concepts of the PlayStation controller, which players came to love. One early issue with the DualShock 4 was that the rubber surface on the analog sticks would wear down easily. So in 2016 came an upgraded version known as the DualShock version 2, which had more durable rubber, in addition to a light bar on the face of the touchpad and an improved battery life. On December 3rd, 2018, Sony released the PlayStation Classic, a miniature version of the original 1994 PlayStation console that had launched exactly 24 years prior. Nintendo had already released mini versions of their NES and SNES systems, so it was unsurprising when Sony joined in on the trend. PlayStation fans seeking some nostalgia could enjoy 20 preloaded titles that included Rayman, Twisted Metal, Metal Gear Solid, and Oddworld: Abe's Odyssey. Despite having these classics, the console's overall game library was considered to be weak, excluding many popular games like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Tomb Raider, and Gran Turismo. The console's $99 introductory price was considered high, and there were also issues with the poor emulation quality of some games. Reviews from critics were mostly negative. IGN gave the console a score of just 5.5 out of 10. In 2020, the 9th generation of home video game consoles hit the market. In direct competition with Microsoft's Xbox Series X and Series S, Sony released the PlayStation 5. Two versions of the PS5 were launched simultaneously, an 825GB base model with an optical disc drive that reads Ultra HD Blu-ray discs, and a digital edition with the same amount of storage but without the disc drive. Whereas the base model was priced at $499, the digital edition was $399. The digital model is essentially a lower-cost edition for people who prefer downloading their titles rather than buying physical discs. Improvements over the PlayStation 4 are clear to see, as the PS5 is capable of stunning visuals, with 4K resolution at up to 120 frames per second. Hardware-accelerated ray tracing results in realistic in-game lighting and reflections, while the Tempest engine also brings games to life with 3D audio effects. High-speed data streaming boosts the console's storage performance. And if you want to play some of your PlayStation 4 games, then you're in luck, because the PS5 is backwards compatible with most of them. As for the power at your fingertips, Sony revamped their controller for the PS5 and moved beyond DualShock to create DualSense. It features a new design with a two-tone black and white color scheme. It has adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, a built-in microphone, and a USB-C port for faster charging. All of these features result in more immersive, more enjoyable gameplay. You can fully appreciate amazing titles such as Demon's Souls, Elden Ring,
Emboldened by the flame of ambition.
Horizon Forbidden West, and Spider-Man: Miles Morales.
Miles, what's the Underground doing?
They're after Newform! Tinkerer! Stop!
There are also some highly anticipated games that are yet to be released while making this video, including God of War Ragnarok, and Hogwarts Legacy.
The choices you make now will define the legacy of Hogwarts.
At the time of writing, the PS5 has sold over 21.7 million units compared to around 12 million for the Xbox Series X and S. Fun fact, since its release in 2020, it has been really hard to get a PlayStation 5. There are multiple factors why it's still so difficult to purchase a PS5 in 2022. First, the COVID-19 pandemic caused production issues. Second, there's a massive global chip shortage. This has become even worse with cryptocurrency mining. These mining operations often use hundreds, sometimes even thousands of chips, making it even harder for Sony to acquire chips to build more PS5s. Third, scalpers who buy PS5s just to sell them at higher prices make it even worse. And finally, there is very high demand. In fact, there's much more demand for the PS5 than for the Xbox Series X or S. So, to all the people still wanting to buy a PS5, I wish you the best of luck. In November 2022, PlayStation announced that its next-generation virtual reality headset, the VR2, would be released in February 2023. Priced at $550 for the American market and €600 for the Europeans, the VR2 will allow virtual reality play with stunning 4K HDR visuals, genre-defining games, and unique sensations. by utilizing a groundbreaking new headset in conjunction with the PlayStation's VR2 Sense controller. A wealth of features will be included to immerse players in games like never before. These include subtle headset vibrations, 3D audio technology, and intelligent eye tracking, combined with finger touch detection, haptic feedback, and adaptive triggers. Realistic facial expressions will add emotion, while better visuals are delivered at up to 120 frames per second via two 2000 by 2040 OLED displays. That's 4 times the resolution of the original PlayStation VR. Hotly anticipated games that players can't wait to see up close and personal are Horizon: Call of the Mountain, and Star Wars: Tales from the Galaxy's Edge.
Oh, hello, my friend.
While other titles, such as Resident Evil Village and No Man's Sky will also be brought to life in new and exciting ways. The VR2 headset itself has been built for comfort, with a slightly slimmer and lighter design than the previous model. There's also an integrated vent for extra airflow and a lens adjustment dial for a more customized feel. A notable inclusion to the VR user interface will be the see-through view, which enables users to see their surroundings without removing their headsets. At the touch of a button, users will be able to switch between real-life surroundings and the in-game content of the PlayStation VR 2. Also, you'll be able to set a customized play area, similar to other VR headsets, where a boundary will appear if you get too close to the edge of your designated play zone. At last, no more banging your shin on the coffee table. It's exciting to see how PlayStation continues to evolve, and as much fun as it is to look back, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next. If you enjoyed this video, why not watch the evolution of Xbox next? Thanks for watching.